So this is a reading um, that covers a brief history of the Armenian genocide, and it's written by Sarah Cohen. It's kind of complicated and intended for someone pretty sophisticated in their learning. So I'm going to do a read aloud so I can explain it to you through this video and also point out a few things. Beginning. Um, Before I really read anything, I usually like to look at the subheadings and then kind of preview how long it's going to be. So one of the topics is who are the Armenians, and then it's early massacres, and then we got this graph of where the incident of genocide was the worst, and you got that photo. Let's look for any other subheadings. You should do this with all readings. It's called previewing. Hope to Despair, the Armenian genocide, some other resources. I don't know if there's even still work. The denial. Uh-oh, that doesn't sound good. That isn't good. So basically, it's 5 pages of PDF on this. Okay, so let's begin. I am confident that the whole history of the human race contains no such horrible episode as this. The great massacre and persecutions of the past seem almost insignificant when compared with the sufferings of the Armenian race in 1915, written by Henry Morgenthau, American ambassador to the Ottoman Empire in 1913 and 1916. I think Morgenthau goes on to become a Secretary of State at some point because I definitely know that name. I've seen that somewhere. Here you see victims of the Armenian genocide, a woman and her son that was harmed. See, he's got a bandage. I mean, they're hurting kids, so they really don't care about what's happening to the Armenians. What does this tell you? Well, if Morgenthau is acknowledging how horrible the Armenian genocide was, it means America was aware of this. All right, so let's see if there's anything in my questions that refer to this. Okay, we want to be in the right spot on the questions. So let's make it bigger because, I can't really see as well as I used to. 125 is kind of ideal for me. Who are the Armenians? So that's the first question I'm looking to answer. Okay, so let's go forward. See if we can answer that. Who are the Armenians? The Armenians are an ancient people who have existed since before the 1st century CE. Armenia has gained and lost a tremendous amount of territory throughout its long and turbulent history. Boundaries of the past have extended from that of the present-day Republic of Armenia through most of modern-day Turkey. The name Armenia was actually given to the country by its neighbors. Inhabitants of Armenia refer to it as Hayastan, derived from the name Hayek, a descendant of Noah in the Bible. Apparently, when the flood ended, Noah was supposed to have landed on Mount Ararat. I remember that from Bible study. And Stan, which means land in Persian. So you see a lot of areas with Stan at the end of it. The Armenian language is unique from other Indo-European language with its own distinct letters and grammar. So does it make sense to me to write that they're an ancient people? Kind of. So I think in art, let's keep going though, see if we can get better. Christianity is a deeply rooted aspect of Armenian history and culture. Armenia was the first nation to adopted Christianity as a state religion in 301 CE. CE is the Common Era. That means generally after Christ, but they try to make it non-religious now. So they say before the Common Era, BCE, or CE, after the Common Era started. This early Christian identity has greatly influenced Armenian culture, setting it apart from most of its neighboring peoples who are not. The majority of Armenians belong to the Eastern or Western dioceses of the Armenian Apostolic Church, an Orthodox form of Christianity. So let's go see if we can answer now. Who are the Armenians? Um, so ancient and what? Orthodox Orthodox is real strict in your belief. I think that part from Noah is kind of interesting, so I'm going to add something like that. Supposedly the descendants of Noah, so that's kind of a deal. Let's continue reading. Although Armenia was at times a kingdom, in modern times, Armenia has been an independent country for only a few years. It first gained independence in 1918 after the defeat of the Ottoman Empire in World War I, but this ended when Armenia was invaded by the Red Army and became a Soviet state in 1920. So a little less than 2 years, probably a little more than a year of independence. With the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1991, Armenia was the first state to declare its independence and remains an independent republic today. Armenia is a democracy and its borders only include a very small portion of the land that was historic Armenia. Okay, so let's add that in. Former public of USSR. Okay, let's move on. Early massacres. Oh, that's terrible. Massacre is a mass killing. The Seljuk Turks began to inhabit Anatolia as early as the 11th century, and by 1453 their descendants, the Ottoman Turks, had captured Constantinople, now Istanbul. That's right here. See, on this little, it's a strait that separates the Black Sea. I think it's either the Dardanelles or the Bosphorus Strait. Pretty sure I get them mixed up. So let's just look. So I didn't get a hit. Go straight near Constantinople on the map. I watched a series on the Ottomans. The Bosporus. Dardanelles, the lower one. I think the Dardanelles is where the failed Gallipoli campaign was in World War I. All right, let's go back to it. So this is the Bosporus near Constantinople. All right. The Seljuk Turks began to inhabit Anatolia as early as the 11th century, and by 1453, their descendants, the Ottoman Turks, had captured Constantinople. That was a big deal. It took a long time for Constantinople to get captured and taken from the Romans, because it was for a long time part of the Byzantine Empire, which was the Eastern Roman Empire. Firmly establishing the Ottoman Empire. The Ottoman Empire was a multinational state and incorporated several ethnic groups, including the Armenians. The Armenians were second-class citizens of the Ottoman Empire. While they were granted some freedoms, including the ability to practice Christianity, they were faced with extra taxes and discriminatory laws, extending to their participation in the justice system, government, and their civil and property rights. Let's go back to our doc. Why were the rights promised to the Treaty of Fair Taxation denied to the Ottoman Armenians? That's a good question. So how come they were treated unfairly? Because they're part of the Ottoman Empire too. So we see the issue. Now we're looking for the answer. By the mid-1800s, as the idea of constitutionalism swept through Europe, some Armenians began to demand more rights, such as protection from corrupt government officials and biased taxation. While most Armenians saw themselves as members of the Ottoman Empire, organized groups of intellectuals protested the discriminatory laws, seeking reform from the government, though not an independent sovereign state. So they didn't want independence, they just wanted fairness. Okay. And a lot of times, nationalist groups seek some form of home rule or independence, but eventually they almost always want independence. During the 19th century, the Ottoman Empire experienced a period of decline, during which it lost territories to Russia, Great Britain, and new states created by nationalities that had once been part of the Ottoman Empire. such as Greece, Serbia, Bulgaria, and Romania. Early in the century, Russia had gained some of the eastern Armenian provinces, including Tiflis, which had become a cultural center for Russian Armenians. Russian Armenians became increasingly interested in supporting Armenians in the Ottoman Empire and their quest for human rights. In other words, the Russian Armenians felt like the Armenians in the Ottoman Empire were family, they were brethren, and they felt connected to them. And when they heard, and they will hear, that they're being mistreated, they're going to really seek to help. Newly created Ottoman Armenian political organizations received some support from Russian Armenians in Russia in their quest to gain equal rights under Ottoman law. The Treaty of Berlin included a clause that would provide more rights for Ottoman Armenians, including fair taxation practices, protection from tribal attacks, and the right to give evidence in Ottoman courts of law. If that happened, we probably wouldn't have had an issue. But it doesn't happen because unfortunately these rights were never granted, as the Sultan was empowered by the treaty to serve as the protector of the Armenians. And who was influenced by the anti-Armenian sentiment? The Sultan. This was in contrast to the terms of the earlier Treaty of San Stefano with the Treaty of Berlin, which the Treaty of Berlin replaced, and which had assigned the Russians the responsibility of ensuring that the Armenians in Ottoman territory gained more rights. And remember, the Russians really supported the Armenians legitimately, so they would have actually done that. The reason for the change was the presence of Russian troops in the region was of great concern to Great Britain and the other great powers of Europe who wanted to deter the expansion of Russia. Okay, so that is our answer. Former rights promised tyrannies. Power to enforce Treaty of Berlin. You make a typo, fix it. Just leave it. Given the Ottoman Sultan to basically keep Russia weak. Man, Armenians never got fair taxation or better laws or justice. They couldn't give evidence in a court. So then, even in court and official systems, they couldn't defend themselves. So it's totally unfair. And it's really, none of it was people trying to do what was right. They're just trying to keep Russia weak. Okay, before we go on, and I'll keep reading there in a second, I just want to point out this graph. And you see all the red circles? Well, the bigger the circle, the larger the number of deaths that occurred during the Armenian genocide. See these biggest circles? And then you have a whole lot of smaller ones. Here's the sad thing. A lot of the places where the number of deaths was very large, and you see these little lines. These lines represent these death marches, where they would take the people, the Armenian people, and they wouldn't give them any food and water, and they'd make them march through the desert. You know, when you make someone march through the desert with no food and water, they die. And it's not an accident, it's an intentional act. But the Turks would have said, well, we didn't really kill them, it wasn't a government plan. But if you're marching people with that through the desert and not giving them water, you're killing them. And see, they did have concentration camps along these routes, but eventually they tried to move them out. Most of them are in near Lebanon, Syria, and on into modern day Turkey. But here's the thing that's really sad: these routes where the Armenians were killed by the Turks, they they were used, like somewhat recently, by ISIS to kill their enemies the same way. And so it's sad that people have been getting killed just because of their membership in a group. These genocides really are continuing. All right, let's continue reading. But let's peek ahead at the next question. How many Armenian kills? So we're looking for info on the Armenian massacre, and we're looking to keep reading. Let's go a little bit more. After the Treaty of Berlin, Ottoman Armenians continued to protest discriminatory laws, and eventually the Sultan responded to these protests with massacres. Massacres of the Armenians began in the 19th century under Abdul Hamid II. That's awful. The last of the Ottoman sultans actually to rule the empire. The worst massacres during this time occurred from 1894 to 1896 after tax protests by Armenians. They are now known as the Armenian massacres, and some believe represented a foreshadowing of the genocide to come. If you have to pay higher taxes because you have a different faith, you would think that was unfair too, and it was totally unfair. But it is what was happening. So people protested, and then they killed them because they were protesting. During the Hamidian massacres, 100,000 to 300,000 Armenians were killed in towns and villages throughout the areas of the Ottoman Empire. Thousands of Armenians fled and found refuge in Europe and the United States. Some who stayed converted to Islam in order to save their own lives. Okay, so there's our answer. 100,000, 300,000. I want to double check the directions just to make sure. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of the extra lines here. Don't need them. Anything about writing a complete sentence? No, it actually says briefly answer. So that's what you should do. Okay, what we're looking for now is the amount of money created from the Near East Relief Fund to help Armenians. All right. The massacre caught the world's attention because of their unique nature. Armenians were unarmed and adhered to the perimeters set forth. I bet you that should be parameters set forth by the Ottoman government. The massacres were publicized in newspapers throughout the world, so the whole world knows of this. U.S. media paid particular attention to the events. The New York Times, a very famous publication then and now, as well as other news sources, regularly publish articles about the brutal killings, coverage that would continue through the Armenian genocide. Many American missionaries and diplomats who worked throughout the Ottoman Empire witnessed the atrocities firsthand and helped mobilize relief efforts. Aid for Armenian victims became the first international mission of the American Red Cross. Later during the genocide, a society known as the Near East Relief would raise more than $100 million in assistance to Armenians. So what does that tell you? A lot of people cared and tried to do something, even financially, to help. The funds collected saved countless Armenians' lives in the 1890s and during the genocide, probably to help them have enough money to move, get out of there, which at the time represented more money than all the aid raised to help tsunami victims this year. I think this was written 2005, so I think they're talking about Katrina, but I'm not 100% sure. Let's look. U.S. Hurricane 2005. Katrina. Yeah, Katrina was awful. Yeah, good thought. I remember that. But you were so young. I thought I just had it figured out. In 2005. The funds collected saved countless Armenian lives. Was it only okay? Tsunami victims this year. While the funds collected saved countless victims' lives, it was the only aid Armenians would see. Oh, so we could have done more to help. So how much was it? 100 million. It's a lot of money, but you could save a lot of people for that much. All right, that's about 20 minutes in on this. Let's keep going. Hope to despair. In 1908, Armenians and other minorities of the Ottoman Empire began to rejoice in what promised to be a new era of tolerance and the establishment of a participatory government in the Ottoman Empire. By the way, if you ever need more time, just pause the film, answer the question, then keep playing the video. Armenians, Arabs, Greeks, Jews, and Kurds have begun working with a group of Turks to challenge the authority of the Sultan. This group was known as the Ottoman Liberals, and the Turkish coalition of the group adopted the name Young Turks. Okay, so Young Turks are these groups of young Ottomans who think they are going to make things better. But they're not just Turkish. They are, well, they include the Armenians, Arabs, Greeks, Jews, and Kurds, but they also include the Turks. So basically, it was Ottoman liberals and Turks had a group that they called themselves the Young Turks. And what did they want? They wanted to create a modern state that represent inhabitants of the Ottoman Empire more equally and render the Sultan politically powerless. In 1908, one of the Young Turk groups, the Committee of Union and Progress, CUP, but for CUP moving forward, that's going to mean the Young Turks, at least one of their groups, marched on Constantinople and overthrew Sultan Abdul Hamid. So they got rid of the old leader and put themselves in charge. So let's try to write that up in our next answer. They wanted to create a modern state and make the Sultan powerless. Eventually overthrow and take power in Ottoman Empire. That's why they considered this the powder keg, because people considered that leadership unstable. That is how I always clean it up. All right, let's keep going. Over the next year, the Ottoman Empire developed a constitutional government, providing equal rights for all of its citizens. Ottoman Armenians hoped that the new constitution would protect them from the violence they endured under the Sultan. However, as time passed, advocates of liberalism in the government lost out to a group promoting authoritarian rule and a radical form of Turkification. Like Russification, Turkification was trying to make all of the Ottoman Empire more Turkish, like Russification tried to make all of the Soviet Empire more Russian. In April 1909, Armenian hopes were dashed as Hamidian supporters in the city of Adana carried out a massacre of Armenians as part of an attempt to reestablish the power of the Sultan. So you have this counter-revolutionary group that creates this massacre in Adana. Adana was heavily populated by Armenians who had at one time been part of Armenian territory. Despite attempts of resistance, in the end, almost 30,000 Armenians were killed and nearly half the city destroyed. So it looks like the answer for the next question is 30,000. Let's just add in half city destroyed. Let's keep going. What's the next question? So what happens to the culprits? Who did this? Armenian genocide. The culprits of them were never punished. Oh my gosh, they kill 30,000 people, destroy a city, half a city, and nothing happens. And after 1909, an extreme nationalist political movement promoting a policy of pan-Turkism, Turkey for the Turks, gained backing from Turkish populations throughout the Ottoman Empire. So that's important. They're never punished. So what do they learn? They can get away with it. And in fact, not only never punished, they form a group of extreme Turks, basically. In addition, the Ottoman Empire, now known as the sick man of Europe, because look at all these leadership issues and killing of people, their own population was weakened. by the loss of land in southeastern Europe in the Balkan Wars of 1912 to 1913. One of the Ottoman Empire's greatest enemies was Russia, as Russia was constantly threatening the security of the Ottoman Empire and controlled parts of the eastern edge of the Ottoman Empire that was populated by Armenians. Since the Russians had advocated for Armenian reforms in the past, because the Russian army did have Armenians serving as soldiers, because they had Russian Armenians too, the Ottoman government was concerned that Ottoman Armenians might commit traitorous acts, even though there was little evidence of this. This fear helped to establish public sentiment against Armenians, very similar to anti-Japanese sentiment in America during World War II, post-Pearl Harbor. All right, I bet you that's important. Support the Armenians. The Russians supported. Well, the Russians are continuously advocating for fair treatment of Ottoman Armenians. We've already seen that. Let's see if we see anything else. Ottoman Empire entered World War I in 1914, fighting against Russia in campaigns that straddled territory inhabited by Armenians on both sides of the border. The Ottoman Empire was badly defeated by Russia in a campaign in the winter of 1914 to 1915, and the government made the Armenian community a scapegoat for the military losses that occurred at the hands of the Russians. Okay, so they blame the Armenians for losing to the Russians. They're basically going to call them spies, even though there's no evidence. Okay, and so when does this first occur? By the spring of 1915, leaders of the ruling party, the CUP, seized the opportunity of a world preoccupied war to erase the Armenian presence from almost all Ottoman lands. The CUP. Okay, so what was the defeat? It was the defeat in winter of, what's it, 1915? Or just, let's go back. The defeat by Russia in the winter of 1914-15. All right, let's defeat by Russia in the winter of 1914. That's when the scapegoating started. Okay, now we're looking for the leaders of the CUP. Seized the opportunity of a world preoccupied by war to erase the Armenian president from most Ottoman lands. The CUP was a triumvirate led by Hamid Talat, Ismail Enver, and Ahmed Jamal. Let's write that in. Talat, Ismail Enver, and I do have to keep clicking back and forth. That's okay. No matter how many times I have to click back and forth, I'll do it because I want to keep it in my brain for at least a second. So I don't want to copy and paste, even though that would be easier. Ahmed Jamal, Ismail Enver, and Mehmet Talat. Okay, I got it. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and pause here and make a second video to finish this. We'll pick it up in the second video. Feel free to do this on the second day. That was enough for today.